Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, and we are going to share the key updates in China's food labeling regulations, and which are two important standards. One is GB 7718, and the other is GB 28050. Um, this is Chao from FoodMate. I'm going to introduce the updates in three aspects today. So the first part, I'm going to give an overview of the change of the new standard. And also include the possible impact for enterprise. And in the second part of today's presentation, I'm going to introduce the major changes of the two standards. And in the third part, I'm going to share some compliance measures that enterprise can take. Now we are going to move to our first part today, is the overview. And About 1 month ago, the National Health Commission and the State Administration for Market Regulations, they jointly released the new standard, namely the GB 7718 and the GB 28050. So one is the general rules for the prepackaged food labeling, and the other is the general rules for the prepackaged food nutrition labeling. Um, the effective date of the two standards will be 2027, March 16th. So roughly about 2 years of the transition period. During this time, enterprise can either implement the new standard in advance, or they can still use the old standard labels until the end of the transition period. And after the transition period, the enterprise should use the new standard and no longer to use the label under the old standard. And the possible impact of the two standards for enterprise is first, there's an increased cost of the label production. For example, the definition of the new standard include the prepackaged food sold by measurement, like the cookies on the right side in the figure, and which means the small packaged food in the future will have to comply with the GB 7718 and the GB 28050. And also, the new standard refined some requirement for single ingredient food and the edible substance bears the packaging functions and also the composite ingredient and so on. So this is the first impact. And the second impact is the product development and the marketing strategy may have to change for the enterprise. So for example, the phrase like zero addition or no addition or similar wordings cannot be used anymore. In recent years, we noticed that customers or consumers have more concerns about the food nutrition values, and they prefer to choose product like uh, with the wordings like no addition or zero addition. They think that such products may be healthier, but in the future, similar wordings cannot be used anymore. And also for nutrition table, the phrase children and adolescents should avoid excessive intake of salt, fat, and sugar should be marked under the bottom of the nutritional table. So by the end of the nutritional table, this phrase should be put in the future, and this is a mandatory requirement. So this may affect the product development and marketing strategy for some enterprise, like they may have to redesign their labels or redesign their marketing strategy in the future. And the next is the increased cost in production management, including the management of the nutrition labels or product labels. So, for example, the mandatory items in the nutritional label will be two more, including the saturated fat and sugar. So currently, only totally 5 items are mandatory, but in the future, totally 7 items listed in the table on the right side, as you can see, is mandatory. And also labeling of allergens need to be strengthened in the future, which means the labeling of allergens in the future is also mandatory, although it is still voluntary at current. So in the future, enterprise may have to redesign their labels or make a better production management of the labels to make sure they follow all the requirements in the two standards. And let's move to our second part today, and let's check what's the major changes of the two standards. So I will introduce the first standard, that is GB 7718, and then follow the second standard, the GB 28050. So for the GB 7718, the first change is the definition for prepackaged food. First, unit of measurement like length is added in this version of the standard. And also the prepackaged food sold by the measurement. Normally, what we see is the food packaged in the small packages and sold in bulk or sold by the measurement of weight volume. They are included in the definition of the prepackaged food, and which means they have to comply with all the mandatory requirement in this standard. Also, the new standard optimized the labeling requirements for ingredient list. So, for example, clarified the multiple requirements for the ingredient list and also refined the labeling requirements for compound ingredients, like compounding ingredients of compound ingredients is not necessary to show in the ingredient list, and also adjusted the labeling method for food additives, clarified the labeling requirements for compound food additives, and also added the labeling requirements for bacterial strains. Next change is the further refine and clarify the quantitative labeling of the food. So first is the refine the labeling requirements for special emphasis. So basically anything like appears, the name of an ingredient appears in the product name, then the amount or the addition amount or the content level in the finished product should be indicated in the product. And also standardize the requirement for claiming wordings like we just mentioned, the no addition or not included, not used. Wordings like zero addition, no addition, not used should not be used anymore. And for food additive, wordings like no food additive or other descriptive words cannot be used. Please note that the wordings for describing the nutrients like low in fat or no fat can still be used, which means the the claimings for nutrient content can be used, but for the ingredient like no food additive, no sugars added cannot be used. And also standardize the use of images on food labels. So for example, if the flavor of my food only comes from the artificial flavors, then the real picture of the ingredient, like I have a mango flavored beverage, but the flavor only comes from the artificial flavor, I cannot use the picture of a real mango. And other than the picture of the real mango, I can use other patterns like drawing of the mango or any other image can be used on the food label. And also next change is the accurate date identification for the food. So currently only shelf life is required on the product package, but in the future, the exact date of the expiration date should be marked on my package. And also enterprise can voluntarily to indicate the storage period for consumption. So this is based on the characteristic of the product. So normally this date will be beyond the expiration date. And this date means the product is expired and the quality of the product cannot be guaranteed anymore. But from the aspect of the safeties, like there may be still not enough pathogen to cause people sick, and this food is still okay to eat but only maybe the quality is not as good as in within the expiration date. Next change is the modify the labeling requirement for quality levels. So basically, if my food follows a standard and there is the quality levels in the standard, I have to mark the quality level of my product. However, on the other hand, if the quality level is not specified in the standard, then I cannot mark my product with the quality standard. Like I cannot say my product is the top grade or grade one, the quality level one of the same type because in the standard I implement there is no quality level inside. Next, the big change is the allergen information. So in the future, allergen information will be mandatory on the product labels. Currently, the allergen information is voluntary and the enterprise can choose to label or not to label them. But in the future, the allergen will be mandatory and a total of 8 categories of allergen are mandatory to label. And if enterprise think there is more source of the allergens, enterprise can also voluntarily to choose to label the additional allergen source in their product label. And also the requirement for labeling principles of food claims. So basically, there's only one principle that is all food claims should be true and accurate to describe the nature, to describe the food or the food ingredient or any component inside the food. For the imported food, the new standard has an additional section. This is the first time this standard has the requirement for imported food. So in general, the imported food should comply with all basic requirements in the standard. And also for imported food, there are additional requirements like a registration number from GACC or competent authority of the manufacturer should be labeled on the label. And also the country of origin should be specified on the label. And also the new standard gives the method of how to determine the country of origin. And also, if there is a requirement in the suitable population in the dosage or method of the consumption of the food, it should be labeled in the label with the corresponding Chinese content. For Chinese enterprise, it's necessary to show the food production license number and the product standard code. But for imported food, it's not necessary to show those information. So this is the main change for the imported food. And the next is the use of digital label. Uh, in the future, the digital label is one option for enterprise, and which gives more method for enterprise to show their information on the label. And currently, this is a voluntary option for enterprise to choose. And if enterprise to choose to use the digital label in the future, they should indicate near the QR code, meaning that the QR code refers to a digital label, and any information scanned from the digital label should avoid the pop-up advertisement or other distraction information, and only regular information which we can see in a regular food label should be shown in the digital label for consumer. So basically, those are the main changes in the GB 7718. And next, we will share the key change in the GB 28050. So first is the scope of application. So this standard applies to the prepackaged food described in the GB 7718. And this new standard clarifies the nutrition labeling for special dietary foods, which means special dietary foods should follow GB 13432 for the nutrition labeling instead of following the GB 28050. And Examples for special dietary food like formula food, formula for infant and young children, or special formula for the medical dietary purposes. So in GB 28050, it adds and improved some terms and definitions. Like in the new standard, it adds the definition for energy, carbohydrate, and several other nutrients. It also point out or specified that sugar in the nutrition table only refers to those five sugars, which are fructose, glucose, sucrose, maltose, and lactose. So any other carbohydrate, they are not considered as sugar in the nutritional labels. So even though they may be considered as sugar, but in the nutritional table, the sugar only refers to those five sugars. So the next change is the mandatory labeling of the items. As we mentioned, it will be totally seven mandatory items to be labeled on the food label. The new ones are saturated fat and sugars. And also by the end of the nutrition labeling, the phrase children and adolescents should avoid excessive intake of salt, fat, and sugar should be marked. And for labeling of nutritional components, it's encouraged that enterprise to label vitamin A, vitamin B1, vitamin B2, calcium, iron, and zinc, although they are not mandatory to show in the nutrition label. And also the new standard have the zero boundary value and rounding intervals for several nutrients, like N3 polyunsaturated fatty acids, the alpha-linolenic acid, and so on. And also adjust the NRV values for several nutrients, like vitamin D, like biotin, choline, and so on. And also remove the NRV value for cholesterol. Next, for the nutrition labeling, the information like graphics, text, and other meanings can be used to help explain the terms. For example, for energy, the terms or text like calories or kilocalories can be used to explain what is energy. And for sodium, salt can be used to explain what is sodium. And also, fat, oil can be used to explain what is fat. For the patterns and the items from the Chinese dietary guidelines for residents, they can also be used to describe or explain what information is in the nutrition labeling and what the items means. Next change is the tolerance range for some nutrients, like for vitamin A and vitamin D, there is no more the upper level. So currently, the testing value should be between 80% to 180% of the labeled value for vitamin A and vitamin D. But in the future, the testing result only needed to be no less than 80% of the labeled value, but there will be no more upper limit for those two vitamins. And for lactose, instead of a lower limit under the current standard, the limit will be replaced by an upper limit, which is 120% of the labeled value. So in the future, the testing result of lactose for a product, if the lactose is labeled in is appears on the label, should be less than 120% of the label value. And the next change is the adjustment exemption rules for the mandatory nutritional labeling. So basically, the new standard adds some categories of food or removed some categories of food that are exempt from the nutrition labeling. Like some examples are add green seeds, the shrimps, crabs, and so on are exempt from the mandatory nutritional labeling. And the ready-made and sold food, like a bakery in the supermarket, they bake the bread and sold the bread the same at the same place. Those kind of food are removed from the exemptions of the mandatory nutritional labeling. So, which means some foods like I just mentioned, the bakery foods in the supermarket, in the future, they are no longer exempt from the nutritional labeling and they have to show the nutrition information. Also, the new standard revised the new nutrition claims and the nutrient function claims. So, for example, in the new standard, the claim of low protein is removed. So, product in the future can no longer claim low protein on the label. And also, some new claims is added, like N3 polyunsaturated fatty acids and contains the fatty acids or rich in these fatty acids is added, and the enterprise can choose to use these claims if they comply with the certain requirement. Next change is the labeling method for portion size. So in this standard, it adds the definition of the portion reference value and gives 18 categories of food for reference. And also it specifies when enterprise claim the nutrition value in portions, either the weight or the volume of the portion should be specified. Like for cookies, one portion should be specified if it's something like 30 grams or 50 grams, or for a beverage, it should be pointed out a portion is either like 100 milliliters, 200 milliliters, and so on. In our next part, I'm going to share some compliance measures for the enterprise that enterprise can take to make sure they comply with the new standards. So first is the training. So enterprise can organize the internal trainings and evaluate the trainings and to see if they have to catch up or make more trainings about the new standard and make sure the relevant personnel can understand the new standards well and make sure there's no uh, violation of the new standards. And also, enterprise can make self-inspections and adjustment on the label if necessary. So, for example, allergen labeling is not mandatory currently, but in the future, allergen labeling is will be mandatory, and we can check if my product have the allergen label on, or I have the, or how my date is labeled on the like I have only the shelf date, and in the future, I'm going to label the specific expiration date on my food label. And also maybe change some marketing terminologies. Like I have zero addition on my product label, but in the future, I need to avoid such wordings on my product label. And also, maybe I need to check my nutrition labels, like do I have saturated fat or sugar on my product, and those two nutrients if they are not currently included. And also the wordings like children and adolescents should avoid excessive taking of the sugars, the fat, and so on. Next, enterprise can do is to make label redesign and adjustment. Like for small packaged food, the nutritional information will be mandatory. So the new exempt rules is about less than 20 square centimeters. If any small packaged food is less than 20 square centimeter with the largest surface. Only in this condition, so the nutritional information is not mandatory to appear on the label, but it should still appear somewhere either like the on the container of the product, or maybe attach an instruction, or even make a digital label. When consumers scan the digital label, they can find the nutrition information and also the registration number. So in the future, if it's a imported food, do I have the registration number either from the GACC or from the authority? Do I have the registration number on my product? And also the digital label. Am I going to use the digital label? And if I'm going to use it, how I'm going to design and what information I'm going to show to the consumers. Enterprise can make the designs and the adjustment if necessary. So next is the supply chain collaboration. So basically, this is for the risk of the allergen source. So because the allergen source is voluntary information at current, so maybe some product they do not have the information, but in the future it's mandatory. And even though I do not use the direct ingredient that have the allergen source, there is still the possible risk of the cross-contamination. And the enterprise can check with their suppliers to see if there is the risk of the allergen source in their product. And also the last is the testing and compliance verification. That means the testing of the nutrients and also the testing of the label itself. So enterprise can choose to test more nutrients like saturated fat and sugars in their product to make sure they comply with the new standard. And also they can make the compliance testing of the entire label to make sure their label is product. For example, phrases like zero addition or no addition of wordings is avoided. And also for ingredients like food additives, there should be no phrase like no food additive or zero food additive appear on the product label. Basically, that's for today's sharing. And if you have more, any questions, this is our contact information, or you can leave your questions in the chat box of the today's sharing. And we will record your questions and get back to you as soon as we can. And thank you very much again for your time today.